In the heart of a small, sun-baked African village, where the dry winds carried the whispers of ancient stories, lived two brothers, Taye and Kofi. They weren't just ordinary boys. They were sons of Adebayo, a man known far and wide for his wisdom and strength. Adebayo was more than just their father. He was their protector, their teacher, their world. Under his care, they learned the ancient ways of their ancestors, the value of community, and the strength of family bonds. But one day, the world they knew changed forever. Their father collapsed in the fields, clutching his chest as he gasped for air. Panic spread through the village as the once indomitable Adebayo was rushed to the village healer's hut. The healer did what he could, but the illness was beyond his power. "He needs to go to the city hospital," the healer said gravely, "or he will not survive." The words cut through the boys like a knife. They knew what this meant. The hospital, with its sterile walls and doctors in white coats, required money, and money was something they did not have. The cost of the surgery was far beyond anything the brothers could ever dream of affording, but their love for their father was stronger than any obstacle. Desperation set in, and soon, Taye and Kofi would find themselves facing an impossible choice. As Adebayo lay weak and pale on the thin mat in their hut, his breathing shallow, Taye and Kofi sat in silence. The weight of their situation pressed down on them like a suffocating blanket. How could two boys, only 12 and 14, save their father from death? They had no riches, no treasures to sell, and no family to ask for help. Each day they watched as their father grew weaker, his eyes losing their sparkle, his once strong hands trembling. The villagers were kind, offering what little they could, some food, a few coins, but it wasn't enough. The boys took turns by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering words of comfort, but deep inside they knew time was running out. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, Taye heard something in the market. As he and Kofi walked among the stalls, searching for any way to earn even a small amount of money, they overheard a conversation between two men. "I heard someone sold their kidney," one man whispered, "made a lot of money, enough to pay for a whole family's debts." Taye's heart stopped. Could this be the answer? The idea was terrifying, but it was also the only hope they had. "Kofi," Taye said quietly, pulling his brother aside. "I heard something. I think we could do it. I think we could sell one of our kidneys to save Papa." Kofi stared at him, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "But Taye," he whispered, "what if something goes wrong? We're just children. How can we survive without a kidney?" Emotional depth. For the next few days, Taye and Kofi wrestled with the decision. Selling a kidney wasn't something a child should ever have to consider, but these weren't ordinary circumstances. The bond between the brothers and their father was unbreakable, and their love for him was greater than their fear. The choice wasn't between two lives, but between saving their father or watching him die. Taye couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father, frail and struggling to breathe. The thought of losing him was unbearable. "We have to do it," he said one night, his voice barely a whisper. Kofi, lying beside him, nodded through his tears. "We don't have any other choice." The next morning, the boys left for the city. With only a small bag of their belongings, they walked for miles to the nearest town, hitching rides when they could. They didn't tell anyone where they were going, fearing the villagers might try to stop them. As they approached the bustling city, the noise and the tall buildings overwhelmed them. But their resolve was unshaken. They followed the vague directions they'd been given, eventually finding a back-alley clinic where things like this were done in secret. The doctor was a gruff man, his face shadowed with concern. "You're too young for this," he said, looking at the boys with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Do you understand what you're asking for? Once it's done, it can't be undone. You could get sick. You could die." But Tai and Kofi stood firm. "We need the money," Tai said, his voice steady. "It's for our father. We can't lose him." The doctor sighed deeply but agreed to the procedure. "You'll both need to sign these papers," he said, handing them forms that felt too heavy for their small hands. The boys looked at each other, their hearts pounding in their chests, but they didn't hesitate. With shaky hands, they signed their names. The surgery was scheduled for the next day, and that night they lay in a small room in the clinic, unable to sleep. Tai tried to reassure Kofi, though he was just as scared. "We're doing the right thing," he whispered. "Papa needs us." And as we pause for a moment in their journey, if this story has moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories of love, sacrifice, and the resilience of the human spirit. Your support means the world to us. Thank you. The next morning, the boys were taken into the operating room. The clinic was nothing like the hospitals they'd imagined. It was cold and dimly lit, and the equipment looked old and worn. But there was no turning back now. Tai was the first to undergo the surgery. As he lay on the table, his heart pounded in his chest, but he thought of his father and the life they could save. He closed his eyes, trusting that this would work. The pain was unimaginable, but Tai endured it in silence. When it was over, he was wheeled back into the small recovery room, his body weak, but his heart full of hope. Kofi went next, his smaller body trembling with fear, but he, too, was driven by love. He winced as the doctor made the incision, but like his brother, he bore the pain. When it was all over, the boys were given an envelope filled with cash, more money than they had ever seen in their lives. It was enough to pay for their father's surgery and more. But as they held the envelope in their hands, the weight of what they had just done hit them. They had given up a part of themselves to save their father, and nothing would ever be the same. Back in the hospital, the boys handed over the money without a word. The doctors wasted no time in preparing Adebayo for surgery. As the boys waited outside the operating room, their bodies ached and their spirits were drained, but they held on to hope. Hours passed like days, but finally, the surgeon emerged with a tired but relieved smile. "Your father is going to be okay," he said. The surgery was a success. Tears of relief flowed freely down their faces. They had done it. They had saved him. But as they looked at each other, the reality of what they had sacrificed weighed heavily on their hearts. The physical pain would heal, but the emotional toll would last a lifetime. When their father awoke, weak but alive, Tai and Kofi were by his side. He looked at them with confusion, noticing their pale faces and the dark circles under their eyes. What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The boys hesitated, unsure of how to explain the truth, but eventually they told him everything about the clinic, the surgery, and the money they had earned to save his life. Adebayo's heart broke. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at his sons who had given so much for him. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered. "I would have rather died than see you suffer like this." But Tai shook his head, holding his father's hand. "We couldn't lose you, Papa. We had to do it." Word of the boys' sacrifice spread through the village like wildfire. People spoke of their bravery, their love, and their unthinkable choice. The story of Tai and Kofi became legend, told and retold by the elders around the fire, a lesson for all about the power of family and the lengths we go to for those we love. Years later, the brothers, now grown, would reflect on that dark time in their lives. The pain of their decision never fully left them, but they had no regrets. Their father lived to see them become men, to watch them build families of their own. And though they had given up a part of themselves, they had gained something far greater, an unbreakable bond forged in sacrifice and love. Please remember, family is the greatest gift of all. And when you have nothing left, love is the most powerful thing you can offer.